So we will call to order at 3:46. Minutes are provided for review.
I always wanted to make that grand entrance.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
I have my checkbook
Oh,
to
wow.
give you the
In
art.
that case, I'm very happy to see you.
Yeah. I had to dig it up because I never used it
Yeah, yeah,
anymore.
yeah. Looks about as good as mine.
You know, everything you can pay electronically now, so
Yeah,
Mhm.
whoever uses it, check them.
So for those who were at the last meeting, do we have any suggested revisions or changes?
I do. So I have quite a few, so. I didn't make enough copies, but everything so we can go over it and highlight it in big bold. So you go to page 1, for example. It says, Eduardo Caro asked if possible to make lists more active. I don't remember what that meant. Anybody? So I don't know what that
No, we're
means.
laughing because I can't.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
having trouble with it too.
I don't know what that means, to make the list more
It
active.
must have been a long
more
time ago.
accurate.
Active. The very last line.
Could you have met accurate?
Maybe I'm more accurate.
More accurate.
Okay, so let's say accurate.
Okay,
That makes
Isn't that
sense.
committee appointments?
it's under
No,
reassigned time.
Oh.
yeah, the
Yeah, I
reassigned
think
time, yeah,
accurate.
accurate, okay.
Okay, next.
All right, so now to go to page 2,
Uh-huh.
and then it says, Dr. Miller HR report is the report, so I added the word the. Is the report, Dr. Scott working with deans or Thomas Dalings? So I think that I'm adding the word the.
The
For
was already there.
emphasis.
Oh, what am I doing then?
I think maybe you were asking about the word the.
Oh, okay, yeah, report is report, a report is, doesn't make sense, HR report.
It is the report.
It's
is
the
what-
final, like, report.
Do we want to add the word final?
The ultimate.
Official.
report,
Okay,
the-
official?
Official?
Okay,
Official, okay. All right,
then we go down, then in terms of, I guess, keep your assigned time to minimum within contract limits. Disagreed, Phil's college doesn't have the data to support the statement that if he teaches above a certain number of classes, that his effectiveness goes down.
you did say that.
Okay, so that, and then we go down to the
This
next.
was in reference to,
To,
Not being
Overloads.
allowed to work.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Then I think it said he can get around by taking stipend, so I'll just put people.
Where's that?
See where it says big,
He.
the word people?
People.
Yeah,
Got
it used to say he. So I'm saying, it said people can get around by taking.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
And then we go down, it says, and then we go stipends go on future agenda for discussion, so they weren't on it on today's agenda.
No, we did send out an announcement. People didn't respond.
Okay,
With
all right,
items.
okay, next page. Then go, what are we talking about here? Compensating, because we'll carry forward, okay, so this is regards to whether or not faculty will get paid for serving on hiring committees.
Right.
And then after the statement was that if they're serving on hiring committees right now, for faculty hiring committees, they will get paid. However, it'll be up to Dr. Verdian to determine whether or not they're going to get paid in the summer. So then I stated that I am going to inform the faculty that they will get paid to finish the faculty hiring committees that started during the spring, but might not get paid to participate in summer hiring committees, since there's a possibility that Dr. Verdian may not agree to pay.
Okay, so you just want the,
No, that's- yeah.
this statement added?
Uh-huh.
That seems accurate to me. Does everybody agree?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay. Then the third sentence from the bottom up, it said, I just added the word position. I mean, it forgot it was misspelled, it didn't have the I. So I'm just adding, instead of positon, it should be position.
Okay. I'm looking for it.
And it's at the bottom, oh.
Well, in
Oh,
your
in your-
notes,
in
but
the-
yeah,
okay,
in the. Mine says position. Oh, no. First one, got it. Okay.
All right, go to the next page. Must also work Dr. Scott to try and get up to speed at Eduardo Cairo in terms of past practice. This was used, have used when faculty retire, and then council has said past practice is not policy. And then I made the statement, so we cannot say that we should follow past practice here. So this is in response to what Dr. Miller has stated regarding past practice.
I'm looking for it in the
Okay,
real notes.
okay.
Hang on.
What paragraph are you, where are you?
I think it's the paragraph saying Dr. Miller. Eduardo Cairo, in terms of past practice,
This was
this
used.
was used.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
so
Second
we're gonna-
paragraph under accreditation
Yeah.
response plan.
So, but this was used, and we're gonna eliminate have used when faculty retire. So this was used when faculty
Okay.
retire. Council has said past practice is not policy. And then I'm saying, so we cannot say that we should follow past practice here, since our general counsel is saying we can't follow it.
Are people okay adding that sentence? Eduardo Cairo says, so,
So where are we, guys?
we're in,
So on page two,
I'm looking at,
yeah.
yeah.
So
We're on page 2, the paragraph starting with Dr. Miller, third line from the bottom.
Acting under the assumption.
is that here?
Yeah. Council has said past practice is not policy. The paragraph, the second page, Dr. Miller paragraph.
Down
Oh,
here.
okay.
Council, second line from the bottom, council has said past practice is not policy. Eduardo is requesting to add, Eduardo states, so we cannot say that we should follow past practice here.
So the big picture is, we're saying we should follow past practice, and then my response was, well, we can't do that because according to general counsel, past practice is not policy. And this is in reference to going back a few years
Rehiring
with the rehiring rights of retirees. I'm not saying the statement is true, I'm saying that that's what I
That's
said.
what he said at the
I know.
time.
We're not agreeing that that's what count, that, we're not agreeing that we're verifying what general counsel said, we're agreeing that this is what I said.
Mhm. You just wanna get in the
That's
minutes
fine.
what you said.
Okay.
Right, that's all. Uh-huh.
So the next one down, under the paragraph starting Eduardo Cairo, just wants it to say, AS voted Monday, the vote approved Chris Ballone as the new co-chair instead of vote was on co-chair,
Right.
That's fine.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Further down in the paragraph,
A little further down, it says, Chris requested honestly, da-da-da, consultation is not the same as consult collegially. It should say.
where are you looking?
It says consultation, same as consult collegially. But my statement was, it is not the same.
Consultation is not the same
Right,
as
so-
consult.
Yeah, so Chris Malone said, Ms. Malone said constitution is not the same as consult collegial.
Right.
Yes, I remember that.
Okay.
Okay, go about 10 lines down. Eduardo asks, what exactly is it that Chris does not know? So this is in reference, at the same time, he is inviting participation from others. Understand no matter what he says, it won't be end of it. Doing what is best for college at this point in time. Eduardo asks, and I'm adding the words, exactly is, so ask, what exactly is it that Chris does not know?
Okay. I mean, that's fine by me, but we should really try to make a practice of not being this micro with minutes.
Okay. It won't happen starting July, I guarantee. I won't be doing this. And whoever is co-chair is not doing it. Who said this? Whoever is co-chair is not doing their job.
I don't understand.
I don't know, that's why I
I think
just,
we should strike
Strike
that.
it.
strike
That's
it,
fine.
okay, strike it, done.
Okay.
Unless you're talking about me, of course. Put that in there, Eduardo.
No, I don't know.
was that?
Put it in caps then.
And then, at the last sentence is, Eduardo Cairo argued that the Senate is not changing policy. As such, consult collegially does not apply at this moment.
Say that again, please.
Okay, so at this time, we're talking about
Right.
Yeah, right. So I'm saying Eduardo Cairo argued that the Senate is not changing policy. As such, consult collegially does not apply at this moment. Because under consult collegially, it says to change policy. And we're not changing policy, we're just having a vote.
Well, you know, as long as we don't necessarily have to agree or disagree,
Right.
you just want the record to state what you said.
Yeah, we're not agreeing
Yeah.
this, we're just agreeing that I said that.
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's fine.
And then, next page, at the bottom, again, Eduardo Cairo stated that the Senate is following procedure, and as such, the position cannot be flown. The bylaws call for the academic Senate president to appoint, and the Senate did, to approve. This was done.
Trying to find where
Yeah,
it
the
is.
very
in the-
bottom.
But very bottom, page 2 on the
Again,
handout
this in
that,
reference to flying the
Maria
position.
provided.
And I'm simply saying, we can't fly the position because the Senate is following the procedure, and the position is that the academic Senate president appoints and the Senate approves. And that's what we've done.
Okay.
And then we go to the next page, or as to the one those, again, the misspelled word, positions.
Okay,
Okay, and then we go down, Dr. Miller, in the interest of accomplishing this, decreed that there will be 2 co-chairs,
I'm really in the interest of a competent decree
that there will be 2 co-chairs.
that there are
Or
co-chairs.
that there will be, that there
In the
are,
interest of accomplishing this decree that there are co-chairs. I don't know if I recall it decreeing, but I would defer to the video or the notes.
okay, we can,
What I
Stated?
was trying to convey is that there would be
Yeah,
2
stated.
people
Okay.
involved,
okay, they just say stated?
but I'm not sure that I said co-chairs. Well, stated, I mean, did I say co-chairs, Maria? Where's Maria?
behind you.
Maria, did I say co-chairs? Okay, then let the record stand.
And then finally, for this record, decision is made under protest, as this is not what policy states. I don't know who's making this statement. It's, anybody remember making that this is made under protest? I might have, but I don't
Do you-
remember.
Do you remember, Marina, from the video, who protested?
Where it says if the results staff is backing out, then we will be forced to hire a consultant. He does not want, should be AS to my doctor.
No, for the
Right
record.
after that, right after that.
For the record, decision is made under approaches. This is not what the policy states. Sorry, I was talking about.
Dr. Miller? Okay, so we can just put that in there.
Dr. Miller, okay.
And that's it for me.
Okay. Any other suggested changes? Can we approve by affirmation?
Yeah, but I have to say that I have rarely been part of any organization that keeps this amount of voluminous minutes for a meeting.
I agree.
And
I have been part of those.
that normally, and I don't prescribe to this in particular, but normally minutes reflect actions. And only actions. If you look at our board minutes, for example, you see
Yeah.
they're very, very minimal. And that the record is either the audio tape or the videotape or the digital
I agree.
version of what this is. So, and then the other thing I would say for the record, and I will have to read these more carefully, is that these should be much better edited before they go out.
Mhm.
And I'll take some responsibility for that because I have not been looking at these as closely as I should, because even grammatically or syntactically, they're not even hanging together sometimes. So my recommendation going forward is that the minutes not be this substantive.
I would actually
Actions.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that was an
Minutes.
unusual meeting. Yeah.
Okay.
People in the past, what has happened in the past is that when meeting minutes are more broad, people then say things like, that doesn't reflect the discussion that took place. As long as our answer to that is, that's why we have the video and that's why the video is posted, I'm in complete agreement. I think these minutes are long and we should go to a,
They should be abbreviated to either to actions only, and if there's some significant intent or comment that one side or the other really wants in the minutes, they should say, I would like that reflected in the minutes
Mhm.
in some specific way, and we don't get
Oh, no.
this. Yes, Kathy?
I would just like to beg to differ respectfully. When we need accreditation evidence, we need enough of the discussion that shows the analysis. and why the decision was made.
Okay.
Because the team is not gonna look through hours of videotape.
But I think you would agree that this
Yes,
is,
yes.
does not reflect what you
Yes.
just said.
We'll
Yeah.
find some middle ground.
Yes,
Yeah,
I would like
that's
a
fine.
little bit of middle ground, but when there's a decision being made,
Yeah.
the
Well,
analysis
that's why I'm
put
not,
into
I'm not
that
a real
is
fan of
crucial.
only actions for that reason, because
Right.
context is important.
Correct,
But if we can find the middle ground of context
right.
in support of the action, I think we'd be better off.
But every utterance does not need to be in here.
Because what I'm concerned about is down the road, when people pull these out, and the meetings are now, in the future, gonna be people debating what was or wasn't
Right.
said, what was or wasn't meant. And, anyway, okay, thank you.
Okay, so announcements, and a reminder, announcements are times to make announcements but not engage in dialogue on the announcements. Anybody have any announcements?
Do we
Okay.
dare?
Are we there after that?
Oh, I have an
Yes.
announcement.
Mm-hmm.
Happy birthday to Bob Miller.
Oh, happy birthday, Bob.
Thank you, thank you.
Public comment on non-agenda items, unless our videographer has any comments? No? Okay, no members of the public, since we're all in the same meeting. We move on to reassign time, and I'm going to pass off to Valerie to start this conversation. There was a question about the process from a global standpoint of reassign time. I'll let you get it started, and then we can...
Yeah, I think the reason that we wanted to just address the couple of agenda items that we do is just, one of the things we strongly believe in is abiding by process, and we just want to make sure that we understand what the process is moving forward. And so one of the issues was revolving around reassign time policy and procedure. I had been meeting with Eduardo for this transition period and asked him about Manny's committee. He's on a Senate committee currently rewriting a procedure for reassignment, and he hasn't reported out yet, and Eduardo hadn't known the details about where that committee stands, what they've written so far, and we were just wondering what the status was of that.
I think the person who would know more than anybody on this side of the table would be Dr. Bell, but...
So
I mean, I can tell you what I
Yeah,
know.
let's reframe the question. So what exactly is the question again?
The question is, what is the status on the reassignment policy or procedures process that's being written?
Okay,
Currently
so,
with Manny and his committee, I think Chris is on that
right,
committee.
so let me
Mary
take,
Aaron.
okay, let me take an initial response, and then I'll ask Dr. Scott to further respond. My understanding that Manny, Academic Senate, Dr. Bell, Office of Academic Affairs, have been working together for quite some time on developing a new process, a procedure for the assignment of reassigned time. In the interim, what we did is we went back to a previous practice, which was when reassigned time opportunities came up that were not specific to a grant that had to have something, that someone wrote the grant or whatever, that they would be sent out to the campus community for 10 days. People would then submit applications, and then a review committee, usually chaired by the manager who was putting the opportunity out there, would then occur. And all these would roll up through Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott would be the one who approved the actual letting of that opportunity. That's where we are right now. Kathy, can you add any more to that?
Yes. I was not in any of those meetings, but Manny did show me the document. And at that time, I was working with the deans trying to establish just how people got reassigned time, how it was determined what the percentages were. And so with the deans, kind of in a separate process, I was working on, and I looked at Manny's document and I took some of the things out of there. But I created a document, actually I created two. One was looking at people who are already reassigned and what are their duties. And to have the deans who are responsible for these individuals or the work that they're doing, have them identify the tasks and the hours associated with those tasks. So we could get some idea of whether or not whether it was appropriate amount of time, because people were concerned that we had too much reassigned time. So the deans, most of the deans did that. I asked some other people to complete it as well, some committee chairs, such as C&I, they completed it and sent it to me. then I also created another form for the future. So if people are proposing reassigned time for the future, it was basically the same types of questions, but a few different questions. You know, is this really faculty work? Is there any other funding for this? You know, how long do you anticipate this being? You know, that kind of thing. So we do have those in the works. I need to go back to the now that the semester's over and have some more time.
It's my recommendation. We've been at this for 2 years, literally, trying to sort this out. I think we're at a point now where the academic senate, through its representative, whether that's Manny or somebody else, the administration, whether that is Dr. Bell or Dr. Scott, and my sense of this now is it probably should be Dr. Scott, who's got the most working knowledge of it, need to get together, put something in writing specifically, bring it back to this group, and let the group consider and act on it. The process that Dr. Scott just described was almost one of an audit process as much as anything else, just trying to figure out
Correct.
what was happening, and then using that as a baseline in terms of going forward for the support that was needed on the O1 or the district side of the release time discussion. The other thing that is part of this discussion is a discussion that we're going to start this summer with the Faculty Association on department chairs, because that discussion is also going to inform what we do with release time and how release time is used. So I think if you were to say anything about what the last 2 years were about, it was about trying to do two things. One, try to clearly identify what release time we were using and perhaps why. And then secondly, going back to what I consider to be the proper procedures for making release time assignments available. But right now, as of today, I think we're still in the state of flux on this. I don't think we've come to any final conclusions other than tightening up how we're doing the business that we're doing, making sure the change of assignment forms are properly processed, and then going from there.
Val, I think that you're asking so that you could figure out how to continue this work. And I think part of the pain points that have not yet been explored include people who've had reassigned time for years and years that continue to just roll over. And, you know, do we need to build in an assessment to identify if those reassignments are still needed? In counseling, I'll offer that up. We do have people who have had reassignment for years, and I inherited it, but I never really had pause to question because, you know, the counselors are very busy, and frankly, if they're not doing that exact work, they're seeing students. But it is on the books as reassigned time. I imagine that also occurs in other areas as well.
I think it was Kathy and then Ryan.
There were things that I absolutely did agree with Manny, and I just would like to state those. One was that there be open and fair processes, and we've put out numerous.
Since this came up, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've done the BSI coordinator. We're currently interviewing new faculty coordinator. There's been 4 or 5 that have
Study
gone through
abroad.
what I think is a fair and open
Absolutely.
process, and where faculty and administration has interviewed together in a collaborative manner, and I do like that very much. I think it is important that we identify that this is faculty work. If we can put classified staff, if it's more classified work, then it should be done by classified staff. That's really important too. And I agree with the accountability. You know, if you're assigned a project and you're given a reassigned time, there should be something that's submitted that lists what you've accomplished. What were the outcomes? What were the goals? And I think there should be something on the evaluation form for faculty. If you're 50% reassigned, part of your evaluation should be on what you did with that reassigned time, and that would be a negotiated item. But I think with the amount of reassigned time we have, it should be part of the evaluation form and part of the contract.
So I think that a lot of work has been done, and we're probably very close to actually getting something in writing that we can all agree on as far as going forward, just with the caveat that we might have to go back and readdress the topic depending on what comes out of negotiations with the FAA on the department chair thing.
Okay, so I have just a few clarification questions. So Chris is on the committee. Can you add anything to that specifically?
Pretty much covers it. Yeah.
Okay, and so in terms of the document, is it a process, a procedure? How formalized is it? How pliable is it? How easy is it not to follow, etc.?
Again, I don't think it's ever been memorialized in writing until now. So I think part of Manny's goal and our goal was to memorialize it and come up with something. I would call it more of a procedure and a practice than I would call it a policy. Procedures opposed to a policy. At the end of the day, the district continues to have right of assignment. We just want to make sure that those assignments are made fairly and appropriately on the basis of a agreed upon process with faculty through the academic and professional matters process.
Now, does sorry.
I just forgot one thing, and it was real clear that it's important, I think, to Manny and to me as well, that there be limits
To the length.
to the length of,
Right.
so that other people have opportunities.
Right. So again, these things need
That's all.
to be memorialized because except for the time limit piece, most everything else that Kathy described had been occurring, and then in relatively recent years it fell away, and then maybe going back to January, February, we found religion again on this topic, and we began doing it in what I would call the quote unquote right way. But again, nothing has been formalized, documented. We have not seen anything come to this body to say, let's take a look at our release time procedure.
But in this document, I do think there's a couple of things. So it needs to contain exemptions. Right, there's certain positions. So for example, flying reassigned time positions. Are we going to fly the
No.
No, you're right. Contractually obligated positions
And the
such
Senate
as
elections,
Senate,
obviously.
yeah.
Right, I mean, but
I think he's getting at more exemptions.
you
than that.
need to,
I think that's written in there, yeah.
we need to make sure that all these exemptions are included, so that we don't assume.
Yeah.
If it's not, if the exemption isn't there, then that position will be flown. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Sure.
So, elected positions, that's obviously an exemption. Those appointed by faculty association for grievances, that's an exemption. Are there other areas that you were thinking about when saying that?
I'm gonna ask this, I don't know the answer to, grants.
Okay.
Yeah, but those would be the fun of the three. But again, those would be the details that group, Dr. Scott and Mandy would.
expect that.
But I
Mandy
think,
will keep
I think that's what
next year.
Valerie would like to know.
Yeah.
And the list that we received, we found errors in there. I mean, there are errors. So somehow, people have fallen through the cracks. Okay, so the question is, how do we get people through the cracks? So I suggest that what we do is we send out a letter, an email, to everybody, campus-wide, that you need that by June 30th, I'm just making this up, June 30th this year, please notify whomever above you that you are on reassigned time. Because if you don't report, your reassigned time will come to an end this way. So
Okay.
if we have that threat,
Okay, so let me respond
You
this way.
shed light.
It disturbs me, for whatever it's worth, that we would have people quote unquote dropping through the cracks, because the deans have been reporting very, very clearly what faculty is on release time. The deans are supposed to, and they are getting better at, providing change of assignment forms, which have to be done every semester or once a year if we know it's a yearly assignment. So HR can be very prescriptive. So on our side, we're tightening that up. So instead of sending a blanket letter to the whole campus, which really says none of us know what the heck we're doing, I think we should take your comments back from that release time document and look at them and try to reconcile where the issues are. Kathy, you gonna say something?
Yes, the change of assignment form confused some of the deans, just to be totally honest, because they thought it meant there's a change. And they felt that if someone was reassigned and they keep being reassigned, that it wouldn't be a change.
Yeah, but you
So,
see,
we've clarified it.
yeah, I mean, the point is, most of those deans have been doing this job for a long time, so they should not have been
Well, they
confused
were
by that.
confused.
I've been here for 10 years, and so since 2005, we were doing it that way.
Well, and I think,
Okay, we don't need to debate.
But we do
Anyway.
have banner and scissor load, the screen that calculates load, which is new. So you can't necessarily see the load that clearly on scissor load. I mean, that's part of the process.
well,
and
Well,
it's
the
changed.
change of assignment form, well, whatever.
and
Anyway,
I
the
think we
point
just have
is,
to be careful. I need to sit down with HR, with Julie, and go over it. I mean, that hasn't been happening. So when,
well,
So can,
We
I'm
can
sorry,
get-
I'm
we can
sorry,
get straight
can we,
now.
yeah, can we just, sorry.
yeah.
So you mentioned that there are particular reassigned positions listed in this document that your committee is drafting. Can you show, what are the exemptions and what are the lists of inclusions?
Well, that's not, what I'm saying is that,
I don't
what I'm
think-
saying is that the procedure should include exemptions. And
So they don't currently.
I haven't seen
I
the document.
believe
Well,
it does. I
again,
think they're
there's
working
nothing-
on
There
it.
are no
What are the
procedures.
exemptions now?
Well,
I mean,
the Senate officers.
okay, and that's, and
That's
then what Ryan said and that's it?
there's
So-
two,
Well, we don't know.
There are
there are
some we
two
don't know about.
categories. There are contractually obligated exemptions,
Mhm,
all the FA officers,
mhm.
and the various things. And then there are the exemptions tied to the academic senate leadership.
And so because this is not a formal policy and procedure, it doesn't need to be approved by the board, when does it become formalized? Like, when do we start following it?
I think
Well,
we're still working on it.
But I
think
know,
we'll
so
continue in the
when
fall.
do we follow it? When
We've-
you're done?
As soon as possible. We're
Well,
already
well,
starting.
Yeah,
Well, that's my
To use
question.
it.
So if it's not done, why are we already starting to follow it?
Because some of the terms of it are important and need to be institutionalized.
because we need to continue the business of the college. So for example, study abroad coordinator, there's a number of release time positions that have been operating for several years, and they presumably need to continue.
So yeah, so but you had just stated that because that isn't finished, we're defaulting to the way things used to be. So are we following parts of this document now, or are we defaulting to the process?
I'm
that
sure
used
we're
to be?
following parts of this document which also follow the default.
Which is probably our
Okay.
past practice.
Which are past practice, right?
When can we see that document? That's problematic. I
Well, and
think.
that's what I was saying, that I believe that Manny, Dr. Scott, we need to bump this up on the academic senate priority list and on our priority list, get something in writing for us to consider and review.
And because of the time right now, I don't know if we're gonna be meeting again until August.
So I'm just really confused why we're following something that hasn't been finished.
Well, we're
Why
following,
is that common?
we're following a
That's-
practice,
But,
I'm
but
doing what's appropriate for
right?
putting people on a reassigned position. I'm putting it out. I would have done exactly what I did, regardless of, no disrespect, but regardless of what
We're
was
gonna
happening,
meeting.
because I want people to see the positions that are available. I want them to have a chance to apply. I want a process that makes things clear.
So do we have a specific concern?
So yeah, so
Okay.
so basically about the amount of reassignment time that is given to people, like there are certain instances where there's a certain amount that's been stated in a document and then that amount has just been changed. And I'm wondering what the rationale of just changing that is when a policy clearly states that someone gets this amount of reassignment time.
Well,
Or I'm just wondering about the exemptions. If we've already decided which positions are exempt, so I get your point and that's great.
So what I would
agree.
suggest is, if we have very specific concerns, like this is the position, this was the release time, now it's this, we should deal with those one by one, bring them to us now, that's one. And two, I think that we, both sides of the table, should direct our teams to move this up on the priority list and let's get something memorialized and documented.
I would like to make a recommendation, because I think probably part of the frustration coming from Valerie right now is that, and I haven't seen the document either, I think a
Because the
lot of,
document doesn't exist.
well, I think drafts of the document exist, and
Well,
I think
I'm
it
not
would
sure.
be appropriate
sure.
to get whatever does exist,
Mhm.
at least at the moment, as the transitional process over to the incoming Senate exec, so that they at least know what we're all talking about
Yeah, I think that the Senate exec team is going to transition in 3 weeks. Okay? I think to the extent that the existing exec wants to cooperate with the incoming exec in the next few weeks and give them this document, that's your business. We, on our side, stand ready to sit down with anybody, look at what exists now, and put something on paper. In the meantime, Dr. Scott is moving forward in how we feel, she feels, is the fairest, most appropriate way to make these opportunities available to faculty. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah, and we're also trying to lower it, and where it's not faculty work, put it back to classified work, because we're trying to create the capacity for department leads or whatever you want to call them.
Right, which obviously speaks.
Going down, down the road a little
And
bit.
if you go back to some of the genesis of these discussions, it was really about the concern about pulling faculty out of the classroom to teach, right?
Right.
And so this, what you just said, Dr. Scott, falls directly in line with that. Why have a faculty member do work that can be done by a support staff? And, we need support staff to
It's
do
an
that,
inefficient use of money also,
right? Among other things.
among other
Okay.
things.
And so, Chris, can you send me that document?
I'll talk to Manny and, see where we are.
Thank you.
And I think what the plan should have, and I don't know if it, so correct me if I'm wrong,
Do you have any?
say for example, the BSI coordinator position, I'm just throwing it out. Does the plan have a procedure by which the hiring committee is created? Because I think that's important for all these committees.
Yeah, it was in
Right.
the email itself that went out. I'm not sure it was in the body of the positions, but it did say it would be put together by the manager.
I think
Who
he's
was in charge
asking
of that
if
area?
the document that Manny
We-
apparently
I
has
don't know.
prepared,
So that's
is
what I'm
that in
saying.
that document or not? It
Yeah.
doesn't sound
Right.
like it is.
No, right. So
Well, we can
so-
put it in.
Yeah, I
Yeah, it's
think,
led by the manager, and the manager does ensure that faculty participation.
But is that what the faculty want?
oh no,
I don't know. I mean, so that's what I'm saying. I think that conversation needs to be had in terms of who creates the committee and who creates the composition in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
How many of these? How many of those? Pears, apples.
And I have to say, I
Yeah.
think the reason that policy didn't go out is because it's still very much being developed. And the minute you send something out, people start to think, okay, this is what they're gonna do. They don't realize this is still very much in process. So it hasn't been released yet because it's still going through, all these things pop up, and then we go back and rework to, take care of this part or that part. So, but I'll talk to Manny about where we are with it and see if we can have a meeting with you.
and I think we need to go, if changes in the release time percentages change for some reason, that should not happen in a vacuum. That really should be a discussion among those people that are impacted by what that position is going to do. So maybe that shouldn't be a unilateral decision, if you will, but it may be now, but maybe it shouldn't be, depends on the situation, Steph.
And if an amount of reassigned time is in a procedure, what is the process for changing that amount of reassigned time? Because we're doing it.
Such as.
There are multiple procedures, like CNI, the co-chair for CNI. It's clearly stated in the procedures, the amount of reassigned time that the one chair gets, and then there's a vice chair.
Right.
And we're not following that. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, because it's valid that they have
Yeah.
more reassigned time because of the work or that we have to be
And-
flexible,
and
but
I think-
we need to look at that.
I think you're right, and I think what's happened in recent years is, for whatever reason, we've gotten away from following the memorialized procedures. And what we're basically saying today is, and what we have been saying, is that we really need to go back, clean up the procedures, and then live by them, okay? But CNI chair, I mean, there's only a few of these that are actually defined in the release time. You'd be surprised how,
Yeah.
of the
Mhm.
60 release time positions that equal 30 FTE, whatever it is,
Mhm.
there might be
Might be
10
I wouldn't even
that
say
have,
that.
yeah, that exactly, that might have any actual definition. The rest of them just sort of evolve.
Yeah, appeared, yeah.
You know, for example, I don't think we have one for the study abroad coordinator. I don't think it's written anywhere.
I
Is there a
wrote it.
procedure? No, but you wrote it, but it didn't really exist. And I'm not about a job procedure. I'm talking about a procedure,
Oh,
a
yeah.
policy and a procedure behind it. Though, The ones we have the procedures for are the exceptions, I think.
And
So
I'd
can-
like to keep it,
Go ahead.
to keep it a process rather than a really
Yeah.
rigid procedure, because things change so much. You know, like with the CNI, you know, they got all these ADTs and all these
Yeah.
things coming forward, and if we need to make it a little bit more one year, I would like to be able to do that with a discussion
Sure, with a discussion.
And let me tell
rather,
you,
and not just giant procedures that's gonna cause, you know, us all kinds of delays.
I'm going to make this
and-
very as brief as I can. When I first got here in 2005, the Academic Senate had 20% for VP, 20% for secretary, 20 or 40% maybe for the president, and maybe 20% for the treasurer. A relatively conservative amount, which by the way is very typical of most other academic senates or faculty senates across the state. Over time, and they also had 20% for CNI. Over time, CNI went from 20% to 40% to 60% based upon need. We created an IEC position. We created DE. I mean, we just created them as they came up, as the need was dictated. There was neither a procedure nor policy to do that, but the Academic Senate started growing under Ed's leadership from that relatively small amount to what it is today, which is significant. And it grew principally because there was a need. But I don't think anybody ever wrote it down. Now, maybe that was a mistake, but that's the reality.
I know that my question was, can we change the reassigned time for a person if it's codified in a procedure?
Are you talking about currently?
Yes, because we're doing it. So we need to know as we move forward if we're gonna have a conversation. If there's a conversation, there's multiple ones that are.
Because CNI actually is a range, I think, in the procedure. And
Yeah.
I actually like that.
The
because it
reason
gives
I'm
us
asking the
flexibility.
question is because we need to know as we move forward. We don't want to violate any policies or procedures. So we just need some guidance.
I
Is-
think the answer is simply very likely yes, but I think we all need to know precisely what you're talking about. Because if in fact the procedure says X and the procedure was written 15 years ago, and it doesn't really pertain to today, it could be a problem. So I think to the extent that we sit down together and look at the specifics associated with that situation, we can work it out.
So
Because the procedure is a guideline more than anything else,
the procedure's a guideline, so it's flexible, is what you're saying?
usually. Yeah.
Well, I would say this, okay, is that what Stephanie and what you and Stephanie are saying about these, we have certain things that are codified, but what we're not following. I think this, so this will fall on your shoulders, that you could accept it and say that if both the academic senate and the administration agree that you could do it, and then just a matter of notifying the Senate of your decision. Because I think there's sometimes that given situations, things are different. So for example, if we were to follow our bylaws, certain managers would not be at this table. You would not be at this table, but I think that the request to be at the table for this transition is the best thing for the college. So I think in certain instances, I think it's best to be flexible in order to have a smooth process. But it'd be up to you to determine whether or not you want to agree or not. And then if you do make the agreement, just tell the Senate. Like for example, on the Monday, I'm gonna say, well, you know, in the transition, even though the bylaws didn't say that the new team can come in, it's in the best interest for you to be here. And you were absolutely right. We're gonna make decisions that will affect you, so why should you not be involved?
And I think Capm is one of the few things where there is actually a written policy on, and in the makeup, I'm not sure if it is very specifically says the superintendent president brings his or her cabinet to the table, or what it says, to be honest with you.
Any other comments about item number 5, reassigned time process?
Did we agree to anything here?
I think what I heard us agree to, if I could reiterate, is that you would like, on the academic senate side, Chris and Manny to get together with Dr. Scott and or Dr. Bell to, as quickly as possible, put together a written document to bring back to this group
Yeah, and
To
so
dis-
to be very
discuss.
clear, what I would like is whomever the academic senate leadership decides is the person or persons to discuss this, will get together with Dr. Scott and within a reasonable period of time, maybe it's defined as, 4 to 8 weeks, try to come back with a document for Dr. Verdeen and the rest of us to consider.
Yeah, I'm happy to help inform it. I can use the forms that I've created, the processes,
Okay, we
The-
should get the meeting
the
with Manny.
samples. Yeah, I mean, it's not that hard to put together a draft. Although, like I said, I'd like it to be a process and not a formal procedure, so we can have easier ways
Yeah.
of dealing
Okay.
with things that come up.
Everybody in agreement with that?
Yes.
All right, item number 6, academic senate bylaws, and I believe I was supposed to write, and this is my fault, administration processes. Valerie?
So Eduardo shared, well, I already know that one of the Senate goals is to rewrite the bylaws. We've been doing it, I think, for going on 3 years now, and it's an arduous task. And so it's an incomplete goal, I guess, because it's not been completed. And so moving forward, we want to make sure that the process is as streamlined as possible, and the language that's being put in there does not conflict with language in, say, board policies and procedures. And when we look over the bylaws and we look over some of the procedure language, we notice that there are discrepancies currently. And since we have to abide by our bylaws until they are rewritten, we are wondering when there is a discrepancy in the language, which takes precedent, the board policy or our bylaws?
You mean administrative procedure?
Sorry, administrative procedure or our bylaws.
Do you have an example?
Do we have an example?
We do, and they're not in my head right now.
Maybe I'll think of one.
Yeah.
But so say, I mean, it's just
So
the
it's-
discrepancy where the
if-
bylaws says that we can do one thing and say the administration procedure says something else.
I think there are some campus-wide committees, chairs, how they have its own procedure to how to hire the chairperson and the members. But according to the Senate bylaw, when we hire or when we appoint
CNI chair again, that's another,
Yeah.
the CNI chair is an example again.
certain committees, the way we pick the committee chairs and the members is different than that particular committee procedure for the particular shared governance committee.
Hmm.
Because for academic senate, it's the president
For sure.
appoints and then we approve. But certain committees, that's not the way.
In
to
the,
select it.
from the College Council Shared Governance 9 standing subcommittee perspective, there is agreement by the College Council, and each one of those 9 standing subcommittees have their missions, their makeup, and then the terms written in there. And in every instance, it says that the superintendent president picks an administrative co-chair, and the academic senate picks picks a faculty co-chair. So that is the agreed upon process by which that should be occurring. I cannot say with certainty that it's occurring that way. It is occurring on the administrative side that way. I'm not sure what's happening on the academic senate side. So for those 9 standing subcommittees of the College Council, that's the process.
So then if this procedure that's happening in the committee, the one that we were talking about for the reassigned time, if we have this procedure, this policy that's put in place about how we fly certain positions, because some chairs will have reassigned time connected to it, and we agree that we're going to go through a specific process for flying these, But then we have bylaws in the academic senate that say that the president appoints, the Senate board approves. That's in direct contradiction to, so let's take the IEC co-chair. The IEC co-chair is a co-chair of a shared governance committee. So do we follow this procedure of flying it openly, or do we follow the bylaw that allows the executive committee to select and the board to approve?
Senate board.
That's,
If
yes.
there's a bylaw, we follow the bylaw.
I agree, but I would also
So
hope.
wait, just
Yeah.
for clarification, by saying you agree, what you're saying is that if a committee chairmanship has release time, we as administration are okay giving that reassigned time without the position being flown.
Yeah, I was gonna say two things. One, if the district does not agree with an appointment for a strong enough reason, the district will always reserve the right to sit down in Capm or in some other appropriate place, you know, maybe the president and the president of the academic senate talking, you know, however it would happen, to say, the district has a concern for the following reasons, and we would hope that the academic senate would consider those reasons, okay? And what that's really saying is that we want to make sure that people appointed to these positions are actually going to be able to perform the work and do so in a manner that is in the best interest of students in the college in general. So that, I think that, in my opinion, needs to be a given part of the process. Beyond that, it is not for the administration to interfere with the 10+1 rights of the academic senate to do the work of the academic senate. So the example I gave about the 9 standing subcommittees, none of that is in the academic senate bylaws, because none of those 9 have, at least I don't think any of those 9 have any significant amount of release time, although I could be wrong. IEC is
well,
not
it's
one
not a
of-
subcommittee,
that's
but
what
we've
I'm saying.
recommended
It's
it, but PMP,
a planning party tied to the accreditation policy does, right? So that PNP co-chair by that policy is the self-evaluation person.
and I imagine that the PD person will as
Yeah, I was
well.
just gonna say that, the PD
Okay.
person really needs
But the
some
PD
time.
person is going to be a full-time manager. Okay, it's gonna be appointed by the superintendent president.
Separate.
Yeah, but there's still the person that leads that faculty PD committee, because there's so much work going through those travel forms.
Okay, and that may, and so, okay, so that will be an exception, that we
Yeah,
would, that
that
we
would-
would
yeah.
negotiate and we would talk through. But right now, is there a bylaw, an academic senate bylaw regarding the PD committee?
Well, it's general, it's about,
general.
so what I'm hearing is that we defer to the bylaw. So the executive committee or president appoints, the Senate board approves, even if it's attached to reassigned time, that's what we defer to, that's what I'm hearing. So if Valerie chooses to appoint a chair and the board approves it, it could be 100% reassigned time, and we don't have to fly that position, regardless of what those procedures say that we were speaking
Yeah,
about.
so that might be one of those exemptions that Eduardo was talking about.
Or-
If there are bylaw exemptions.
Or what I would say, because then that issue, and that issue is alive and well, Valerie's gonna be having to take on that issue. So my perspective is that, what should we do? Should we allow should we allow the academic senate bylaws to supersede this proceeding? And so I think that as the role that I have and Valerie's gonna have, one of our responsibilities is to defend defend the faculty, defend our bylaws. So as such, the easiest thing I would say is to put that question up to the Senate. And if they say, this is the problem that exists. Do you want this to happen or do you want that to happen? And that's gonna remove a tremendous amount of flack on you, or whoever the president is in the future.
Yeah, there are always gonna be discrepancies,
Yeah.
because, you know, bylaws are written here, and then procedures are written here, and there's a process over here. And maybe there should be some process for determining.
Right, but time marches on, but I think at the end of the day, flexibility is important
I agree.
to be able to
But have a
address
discussion where you
specific
can
needs.
resolve it.
Right,
Or
perhaps.
anticipate the problem, so at least we know that somewhere down the line,
Yeah.
this might occur. And
it's
I
about
think my
communication.
concern is that if Valerie chooses to do that and someone argues that she's not being transparent and following the process that the subcommittee chaired by Manny follows, her answer can't be, we need flexibility. You know, she's gonna need to be able to you know, give a transparent answer. And so that's the concern. I'm seeing loopholes and direct contradictions, and it's, you know, in everyone's best interest to create this process for transparency, but it's in direct opposition to other processes that we have, and
But-
I just would like us to get a hold of that before it gets too far down the road.
To this conversation, we have bylaws that imply or state X, right?
Mhm.
Versus release time assignments that are necessary for a particular need that we have. At the moment, what we're saying is academic senate bylaws will usually trump anything else because those bylaws probably don't pertain to very many positions. They probably pertain to the more traditional positions such as C&I. I mean, what other bylaws do you have that relate to specific assignments?
Well, it's all chairs.
All chairs.
It's all chairs.
All chairs of, the chairs of what?
All
though?
faculty chairs, period.
But faculty chairs of what though?
Chairs of committees.
Share government.
Yeah,
Or-
shared governance,
The
any
academic
yeah.
senate subcommittees.
But those subcommittees
yeah.
typically
The
don't
shared governance
impact
is too.
the administration unless because the only thing that we've got working with you directly are C&I, the 9 subcommittees, standing committees that I talked about, and then in recent years, the IEC, the P&P,
Correct.
and the DE.
Just.
Yeah?
That's a lot.
Well, but it may be. But
That's
the
a
point,
lot of
but the point,
reassigned
but
time.
the point is, those were just created not in a vacuum. They were just created, and we didn't go back. The academic senate didn't go back and say, how are we going to address these? Okay, and then I'm saying the other thing I'm saying, and again, you know, I've only got 3 weeks left in this job, right? The only thing that I'm saying is that let's just say that you guys were going to appoint Attila the Hun to a position, and we knew that Attila the Hun was just not going to be very, very useful. I would think that at this meeting, I mean, in this forum, we would say, the president would say, that Dr. Bell would say, Dr. Scott would say, Dr. Leva would say, time out, this isn't going to work for us. And here's all the reasons why. Because if we can't do it at this table, then we've got a problem. Now, you may argue back and forth, and we may end up at loggerheads, but hopefully what we would end up is that cooler heads would prevail, and we'd say, okay, well, we get it. Let's see if we can figure out a way to move the business of the college forward.
But what we're saying is, isn't it better for the bylaws to kind of refer to hire CNI chairperson? Like, we need to talk to CNI procedure and make sure like
agree.
our language is same as that language.
I totally agree. I think we need to go back and clean those things up if they need to
Okay,
be
so
cleaned up.
just I pulled up the bylaws. So for curriculum instruction, for under our 5.2 academic senate appointments, it says the academic senate board shall appoint the curriculum and instructor committee chairperson following an open selection process.
Agreed.
If you read the administrative procedures for a CNI chair, it's much more detailed. It says that the person who is recommended to be the chair has to have been on CNI for 2 years. They had to have been on the committee the year prior to being the chair. And that's very specific. That isn't this open selection process.
Okay.
So this is like, I think, the most extreme example where our bylaws differ from the administrative procedures.
But it's a great example because what it really points out is that past academic senate, going decades back, right, did not look at that as the administration and better yet the district, probably in relation to accreditation requirements, in relation to just doing good business. The C&I made sure that because it's such a good business, the districts established an administrative procedure that's out of sync with the academic senate. So one or both need to change. They do need to be synced up. Absolutely.
So in the meantime, because right now the changing process has been 3 years now. So what I think we're asking is, do we follow the bylaws right now, or do we follow the administrative procedures in the interim? So I agree that language needs to be cleaned up, but if we have another year of not cleaning that up, what do we do?
Well,
in the
let's get very
meantime?
specific to we have 2 C&I co-chairs right now, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
And we have Janice and we have
Lyman.
Lyman, right? Are they willing to continue?
Yes.
Yes.
okay?
Right,
Do
but-
we want them to continue?
Yes.
And that's not our issue. We're
Well,
not-
but my point is, since we don't have an issue with that, why can't the two sides get together on this issue and modify the language on both sides? Let's just fix it.
Because,
Because this is just an example.
But let's
of
fix them all.
multiple-
Let's fix
right,
them all.
but the reality is, I think in our bylaws, and you're correct, I think our bylaws say we only have one.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay,
The procedure
all right,
for
so,
the two.
so the problem that we encountered last year, who was it, who retired, who was it? Was-
Well, Carrie was in the position. See,
Yeah,
what
Carrie,
hap-
right, well, Carrie retired, but then you have Lyman and Janice that said, we'll do it,
But only.
but
Only
only
together.
if. So if the
We
answer
want
would have
either of us to
been,
do it.
we're gonna follow our bylaws, and we're not gonna, it's only gonna be only one, we would have
We've
ended
had
up with
no-
nothing.
That's exact. And what happened, C and I went from 20% to 40% to 60%. You know, when SLOs showed up, you know, and then we basically, our C&I committee is now doing the work of a C&I committee, and I think decades ago it didn't, and now it is. The point is, it requires more than that. And the other thing is, without getting too lengthy on this, if Janice or Lyman actually said, I'll do the whole job, it would only be one person on a 60% reassigned. But they both said, it's too much for us to do the whole job, we'd like to split it. And then the administration basically said, well, we really would prefer to have one person, but at the same time, we really need the job done, and you guys do great work, and you work as a good team, so we will be flexible, and we will figure out a way to split it.
Yeah, I'm sorry to get focused on this. I mean, we're not trying to focus on these particular people or this example even. It's easy to look back and sort of explain why we did something because it worked out very well. Janice and Lyman get along, they do the job. My issue, I'm thinking back to the Rocha years, and I'm thinking about what I heard faculty saying. When a decision was made, the process wasn't transparent, and the conversation that we had in Senate often was, well, we have these procedures that say this, this, and that, and why weren't they followed? And so I don't want to focus on things, you know, that are great and dandy and that we all agree on. I'm trying to think about in the future, if something comes up, like because I don't want to get muddled into this argument again about transparency and faculty fighting over it.
I would
okay?
propose two things so we can move the agenda. I would first of all propose that should a particular incident come up now that needs to be addressed, that it be identified and that the academic senate leadership meet with Dr. Corner and Dr. Scott and speak specifically to whatever that issue is. And then the next thing I would propose is that Dr. Corner and Dr. Scott work with whichever representatives of the academic senate that the leadership appoints, and we go through all the bylaws, reconcile them with all of the administrative procedures, policy, and the board policy and administrative procedures that pertain thereto, and fix them, the ones that need to be fixed.
Okay, so then I have just a couple more very specifics. Then, so in terms of the chairs
Before we do it, so the minutes can reflect, are we agreeing to do that?
Sure.
Does that work for
Sure.
you guys? So we'll add that to this, we'll do that.
So we need to clean up our bylaws, and after we clean up our bylaws, then we meet with them, with the administration.
Right, and in the process of
bylaws.
cleaning up your bylaws, you might want to meet with us first just to make sure that we understand what cleaning up you need to do.
Right.
Mhm.
See what the scope of the challenge is, if you will.
Because some committees need a very specific qualification and
Yes.
stuff, so like
Yes.
our bylaw have kind of
That's true.
referred to, you need to follow that.
Yeah, you may have to
procedure
defer
also.
to the policy.
I think that's easiest
procedure.
instead of writing everything down.
Well, that procedure that Valerie, that you just stated regarding, I think that's better than our
Yeah,
bylaws.
absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think in those instances, why not, I mean, just a matter of getting the faculty to go along with,
Allow the procedure to impact the revision.
Absolutely.
But you don't want someone to run CNI who hasn't been on it.
100%.
Right.
Yeah, I agree for IEC and other committees as well, yes.
So in terms of, I guess, filling vacancies or term limits, what happens, I mean, how are we, how are we regarding term limits? So like the IEC chair, was that a term limit
I
issue?
think that's clear in the policy for the procedures.
So
There
what
is a
was-
term, there's a term for that.
There's
A
a
term
term,
limit?
there's a term, but there's not a term limit.
No, but there is a point
No,
in
not
time
limit.
at which that person could be changed.
Okay.
There's a time and a date.
So it's good practice then to follow the term
Yeah, so,
dates
and
to
we have
change
not
some
been
of
doing
that.
this as we should for the non-standing committees, because they talk about terms for all of the appointees, and they
Mhm.
should, I think as Chris is saying, I agree there, at least there should be a discussion / election or something. If I'm a two-term, if I term out after 2 years, then effectively, everybody should have a chance to decide whether or not they want me to continue in that role or not.
So does that go to the committee? Does that go to the academic senate president?
Well, in the
does
case-
that go to the
In the case of the
campus?
standing committee, in the case of
Uh-huh.
the standing committees, the superintendent president would have a chance to reappoint. The shared governance groups that appointed that individual would have a chance to reappoint and or appoint somebody else.
Okay. Okay, then the last part is, I guess the PMP chair. If we're abiding by term limits, then what's the term limit on that?
I'd have to look at the accreditation policies.
What does the
there,
procedure say?
does anybody
There is
remember?
one says-
There's no term
I
limit
don't
for
think there is
the,
one,
I
yeah.
don't think it says.
There's no term limit, but it says that the appointment of that person occurred 2 years prior to the due date of the self-evaluation.
and when's the due date? It's 6-year cycle?
7, I
4
think.
years.
Well, yeah, but when this
Oh,
procedure
yeah.
was written,
She's
it
going
was,
to
it's,
7 now, but so 4
we're
years from
adapting,
now,
but it's
roughly.
written, the procedure is written for a 6-year cycle.
Yes.
So the chair we should be thinking about the succession process at year 4.
Yeah,
So then there's, that procedure allows 2 years for the
Yeah.
transition to happen?
Yeah, one of the intent, that's correct, but one of the intents, well, first of all, I think that was written 3 years ago, 4 years ago,
Well, it was written, but it was updated 3 years
2012.
ago.
2 years ago?
3.
3 years, I'm saying, yeah, exactly, it was updated significantly 3 years ago, I think, right?
But
So-
there's, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But the way it's written, I mean, it left for questions, and I think that's why it's very important to clarify as much as possible. You know, in terms of when does it start, when does it begin, is it flown, is it appointed?
Well,
Get
again,
all that.
so 3 years ago, it was dramatically updated. And at that time, the people who did the updating thought that it was very well done, and it was well done. But in that 3-year period now, there's some question I've heard whether or not the accreditation steering committee should be P&P, even though it said very clearly in that policy that it should be the planning and priorities committee. We may or may not agree with that now. So I think it's another one of those policies that people could just take another look at and update and modify if in fact we think it's in keeping with the needs of the district. But one thing that is in there that I think is very important is that instead of having an accreditation self-evaluation person appointed 2 years before the fact so that he or she could deal with it with the self-study, written in there is the fact that we need to have someone for 6 years, 7 years, that there should be an accreditation, a faculty member responsible for accreditation for the whole period of time. And that the release time should be at a variety of differences depending on what the workload is going forward.
Well, the ongoing nature of that position, I think, is inherent within it, because it also says later on that the responsibilities of that person is to do the midterm report.
That's right.
So I think it's already inherent within the policy, and I get the idea of going back and updating policies or procedures as needed, but I don't know that gets to Valerie's question that this is the procedure we have now.
So I can read it. So in the policy 3C, it says, in the fall semester, 2 years before the self-study is due, the self-study coordinator will be appointed and begin training for the position by attending conferences, meeting with the previous SSC, and developing training for the writers of the self-study. During the following spring, the SSC will convene and form the required subcommittees, including the selection of the chairs of those subcommittees as explained in 2B above. So my question is, what is the impetus for removing the current self-study coordinator before this time as outlined in administrative procedure?
Okay, well, I don't know that a decision, maybe I'm just mishearing you. I don't know that a decision has been made to remove the existing self-study coordinator. Has a decision been made to do that? Well, I'm speaking for the administration.
So this is the gray area and the rhetoric that makes us nervous, because I think that clearly Eduardo has said that the Senate believes that should happen. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. You're right. And so 3 years ago these were written, but there we go. It's a gray area.
Well, no, it's
And-
actually not a gray area, it's pretty clear here what it is.
But at the same time, I mean,
Well, we have
To
made a
think-
decision on this, I think.
well, no, but hold on, on a different topic. I think it's a horrible idea to appoint someone, to appoint a person to do a job for 6 years. 6 years is a long time. So we appoint this person to do a job for 6 years, and in 3 years from now, this person is involved in a car accident, and that person can no longer do the job. So what are we left with?
So-
Nobody.
But the procedure was vetted through Senate. So Senate originally decided that this language was appropriate. So at that time, Senate didn't believe that that argument was valid. And you can argue that for any position. And so it's sort of an improbable scenario. Really, this position seems to me like it's 4 years of active work, and then there's a 2-year succession plan because the position requires so much training. And so again, my question is, why is the current SSC being removed before
Who's
She
removing?
has not been
Who's
removed.
removing her?
I have been added to assist her,
But why are
to begin
you,
a transition.
so why are you beginning the
Because we're
transition before the policy says that that needs to happen?
It's not clear when that should happen.
It's
And
very
in the
clear, it
interest
says
of-
right here, I'll read it again. In the fall semester, 2 years before the self-study is due, the self-study coordinator will be appointed, you assuming you're the new self-study coordinator, and begin training for the position by attending conferences, meeting with the previous SSC, and developing training for the writers of the self-study. During the following spring, the SSC will convene and form the required subcommittees, including the selection of chairs of those subcommittees. It's very clear to me.
Well, it seems to me, here, so this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing you're trying to find a way to undo the Senate's vote. The Senate voted for a planning priorities co-chair. Okay, yeah, that says self-study something?
Self-study coordinator.
Self-study coordinator. The vote in the Senate was planning priorities.
Okay,
So
so
hold
should-
up,
are
hold
we-
up, but I mean, what this discussion that you want to have is a discussion within the Senate, not here at Capm. Capm, the administration has nothing to do with the Senate vote. Are you wanting to try to undo the Senate's vote?
I'm saying that my original question is, when do the bylaws trump an administrative procedure? Because I'm reading this administrative procedure, and yes, the PMP chair is automatically aligned with the self-study coordinator.
As the academic
So to
Senate,
say that the Senate has decided about PMP chair, but to ignore that then impacts the self-study coordinator it's false.
as
It
the
does.
academic Senate president, you should always have the same answer. Bylaws trump everything. That is your responsibility to defend academic Senate bylaws. You are willing, what I'm hearing is you're willing to allow administrative procedure to trump bylaws, which is giving away your authority.
What I'm saying right now is I'm asking which trumps which.
Bylaws.
And so,
I
Bob,
just told you.
Bylaws
the
trump.
bylaws trump.
Bylaws.
So
The only thing
where,
that bylaws, the only thing that trumps bylaws is the ed code.
Well, let me ask you this question, where is it?
Board
in
policy
your-
trumps bylaws.
Yeah, board,
Board policy does.
right. Well,
is
where
this
is
not
it
a
in your
board
bylaws?
is this not a board
It's
policy?
a procedure.
It's
It
a
is.
procedure.
Administrative
It- it-
procedure.
So, is there a academic senate bylaw that specifically speaks to this topic?
No.
No.
No. So, here's my position, and then it's good till June 30th, okay? My position is, this kind of thing reminds me of the famous Rodney King line, can't we all just get along? Because, at the end of the day, we have very, very important accreditation work to do for our district. It's my hope that Stephanie continues in this role. It's my recommendation that Stephanie continues in this role. It's up to Stephanie to decide what she's going to do, but it's my hope that she continues in this role. It's also my hope that that the Academic Senate allows Chris Pallone to work together on this process, so that we can perhaps remove the cloud that seems to be over this process thus far. And that there's a collaboration among at least the two of them. They may decide, Dr. Scott or ALO may decide, we need a writing team of 106. I don't know. But whatever it's going to take, we're going to have in front of us July 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, a report from the commission. It will determine, we affirmed with conditions, not likely, warning, probable, hopefully not likely, probation. Okay? We're gonna have maybe 6 months to write responses to that. It's gonna require many hands on deck to get that done. So,
I just want to defend the Senate for a moment when you said there's a cloud over this
Yeah.
process. The Senate approved these administration procedures. We vetted them. So to say that for some reason the procedures are flawed, I don't.
no, the cloud that I was referring to, thanks, Dr. Foster, but the cloud that I was referring to is the disagreement that seems to exist to have Chris and Stephanie work together on this. Okay, there obviously is a disagreement in the room. My personal position is, I'm hopeful that we can get that out of the way and have folks work together. Now, if that doesn't occur, Dr. Burdine and Kathy are going to have to figure out the next move in terms of working with the academic senate leadership and the academic senate in general in terms of where we go from here. My personal position is, I hope that we can work it out for the good of the college.
So in terms of the PMP chair position, is this a final decision? Is Chris going to be leading PMP meetings starting in fall?
So let me make a, okay, so.
No, and I'll tell you why. I'm sorry, Laura, but I'll tell you why. The policy, the board policy, the administrative procedure behind the board policy indicates at the moment that the PNP chair is the person appointed as the self-evaluation coordinator. That's the position of the administration at least through June 30th, okay? I believe that Dr. Burdine will state that board policy and procedure trumps all else, unless the academic senate says it disagrees with education or what have you. But I'm not going to speak for Dr. Burdine. I'm just going to say, I don't, and that, what I just said has been my position all along. In the last meeting I said, well, let's see if we can find a way to bridge the gap and have the two folks work together, and maybe that would be a way to bridge the gap.
So let me just clarify something you
Yes.
said. You said that you hope Stephanie stays on. Agreed. And you said you hope the academic senate allows Chris to participate. That's it, and that's an error. The academic senate voted Chris in. So it should be, we hope that the academic senate allows Stephanie to continue. Because the academic senate voted Chris to be the co-chair, not Stephanie.
Yeah, well,
But hold on.
yeah,
So
sorry.
at first, we wanted a co-chair. Stephanie said, that's not in the procedure. Fine, we had a co-chair, not a co-chair. So then we had this big discussion at our last meeting. And then you said, okay, you know what? We're gonna have co-chairs. So in the interest of getting along, I could have said no, or we could have said no, the Senate voted one, not two. But I agree with you. In the best of interest of getting along and getting this document written,
Two people are better
we
than
have
one.
to.
Yeah, and respectfully, let me just respond quickly by saying simply this. I don't feel that it's my place to get into the business of the academic senate.
Right.
And so the academic senate needs to resolve this.
Mhm.
So that's what I was saying. Thank you.
I think what I heard, however, when Valerie just read the bylaws and the procedure, is that it should never have gone to the Senate for a vote in the first place. I think that's what I heard. Is that right? So
Yeah,
while you
I'm
took it-
looking at the
Okay.
committee chair list in the bylaws, and I don't see PNP or self-study coordinator. So again, I'm just trying to
So
clarify
there's
when
another
we
gap.
have the ability to
Yeah.
appoint.
And
we
I
did
think-
consult here in Capm
Yeah, but I think that,
prior to the vote.
I'm a trained counselor, so I'm always looking for things in conversations, and what I'm hearing throughout the entire time we've been talking is this college and the people here are yearning for a sense of transparency so that we can continue to build trust and then create an environment for success for students.
That's not what I heard. I heard we're not gonna allow Chris to be on the committee. That's what, we need to find a way to disavow
No.
this vote.
I heard that we didn't follow the procedure very clearly. We'll create all this.
Which part was not
distrust.
followed very clearly?
So I don't
What
know,
was your reason for putting?
What procedure was not followed clearly?
You putting, you try to.
Where
put
does it
in
say it
person.
can't be done?
Where does it, like, in that
It's-
procedure
it's-
that was
it's-
through
it's-
Where
various
does
by
it
the
say it
Senate
can't be
itself.
done?
so
So
the
I am
bylaws
correct.
don't say that it can be done, and then the procedures outline a policy or a procedure that isn't the one that the Senate followed. So again, I'm just trying to clarify when we can just make up stuff.
Well, nobody's making up any stuff. So first of all, so I am correct that the conversation here is to prevent Chris from assuming the position.
No.
That's what we're
reject
trying
that.
to do.
I reject
I
Okay,
reject
well, the Senate voted, and the Senate voted to have Chris, period, end of discussion. Now, if you want to take a look, at when we can make changes or what changes need to
Yeah.
be made,
That's
absolutely,
what we're asking.
Oh,
That's
well,
what we're asking.
that's to the
because-
bylaws committee.
Because the
We are
position,
bringing academic senate issues to a Capm, academic senate issues that should be brought to academic senate and bylaws.
the reason that we're trying to discuss it in Capm, respectfully, is because this also serves as a reassigned time position to a shared governance committee. And accreditation is supposed to be something that's agreed upon through consultation between the administration and the academic senate. This isn't about whether Chris should be it or I should be it. It's about following a clear procedure and transparency that's aligned with the procedures that we currently have.
You talked
The
about
position-
reassignment.
The position, it's all of it.
But we're not
Unfortunately, the accreditation coordinator is like the trifecta of all of these like different like loopholes that we have. And so what the question is why outside of the timeline that is identified in this procedure, was that timeline not followed when the
All right.
position wasn't vacant?
So let me try this one more time, and then I would agree that this is really an academic senate matter, and I think that to continue it in this room, being videotaped is probably not the best for everybody. The district's position continues to be that we will adhere to the board policy administrative procedure vis-a-vis accreditation. In that policy procedure right now, it states that the PNP faculty co-chair is the self-evaluation coordinator. That's the position that we take right now. Okay? To the extent that the parties can agree to do what's, in my opinion, what's best for the college, which is Chris and Stephanie working together. They work together in whatever titles you want to use. So that's our position right now. Thank you. Okay, so, so may we move the agenda to the next item?
Okay. Kathy, accreditation response plan, any updates?
May I start very quickly by just saying thank you to Dr. Foster, thank you to Eduardo, and I just got to give you right back. I'll sing your praises while you're out of the room. And to Kathy, they joined me, and we had, I thought, a successful opportunity to testify in front of the commission last Thursday. I really want to thank Eduardo, really want to thank Valerie. I think as the quote-unquote outgoing academic senate president and incoming academic senate president, they both presented themselves very professionally, very appropriately, very supportively of the college and the needs of the college. I think everybody comported themselves with professionalism and dignity, and the testimony was well written and reasonably presented, and we were probably questioned for 15 minutes, Kathy and Eduardo, at least 15, 20 minutes.
I thought it was longer than that.
It might have been.
It felt longer.
Maybe it was just the atmosphere in the room that made me feel so welcome.
But we were peppered with some very direct questions, and I thought our responses were excellent. So we'll see what happens. So I just wanted to get that on the record. Thank you very much.
As a former Marine, was it still intimidating?
Yeah, how many people were there? Like 35?
None of them were smiling.
None of them were smiling.
I would say that I testified at state level hearings, and I testified at federal level hearings, and this took it to another level. The formality of it, the stone-faced nature of it,
Stone-faced.
the coldness of it.
Well, remember, this is the same group that tried to keep the chancellor of the community college system out of a meeting at one point.
Yeah, I can imagine. But
He
anyway,
has no standing.
I think we comported
He's
ourselves
non-accredited
quite well,
college.
and we'll wait and see what happens now. Okay, so,
Well, I mean, we know the areas that we have to work on. We know that we have to work on some HR issues, including, but we did get 60/30 passed, and actually it was very good that we were able to say that it had been passed the night before by the board. And
Good
I
timing.
think, yeah.
Very,
and I-
7120, I think. but-
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
do think that the commission got the sense that administration and faculty are working together in a much more positive manner. So anyways, I was pleased about that. We do need to work with the FA, in particular on the evaluation as it affects faculty for SLOs. We have to do that, and we need to start doing that this summer. We need to get some consistency in our part-time evaluation process. And right now it says that you can do student evals or a classroom visit or a self-appraisal. It really can't be willy-nilly like that. We need to standardize it. So I'd like to have the deans be involved in that and the FA obviously. So that's one section. The next section is governance. We've had two, I think, good meetings about that. We need to go back. I'll be distributing those notes. Just make some last minute changes. It's a pretty long document. Get those out. We know the work that we need to do there on communication, looking at some of the policies and procedures again. Don't laugh.
Don't bring up policies and procedures.
But I mean, we were pretty clear in the documents what we need to do in the governance area, or what we need to do to get started. We need trainings. We can start working on that for fall when we're back, but we can start talking about it now. And then Ryan's got the planning piece, and I know that there's a planning meeting set up.
On Tuesday. We canceled the other one just because, about half the people replied that they were coming. But then when I was looking at the half that replied that were coming, I was pretty confident that some of those people were actually out of town. So I had Marina kind of reach out, and sure enough, it was going to be about a quarter of people, so it was rescheduled for this coming Tuesday, and we have a pretty good audience.
8:30,
who will
right?
be able, 8:30 in the morning, and the focus of it will be looking at the concept that the group came up with at the first meeting, refining it as much as we can as a whole, and then going to more of a divide and conquer model so that we can start really putting meat to the bones. The overall goal, just so I reiterate this a million times, is that a planning process would be approved after thorough vetting and going through Academic Senate and the other organizational units no later than December. That's not necessarily because of the accreditation timeline, although it lines up pretty well, which is nice for Kathy. It's because we need to have something approved by December if IEC is really going to start the process of using program review to guide budget. You need to allow people to do program review in spring so that they can use it in fall to start informing the following year's budget development process. That's my spiel.
Now, when we spoke to the commission, the only things that they asked us about, which Ryan will be happy about, they didn't ask any planning questions, but they asked about the governance work, and they asked about the interim positions, the interim management positions. We did bring copies of the org charts which show which positions are, actually let me have this one. Actually, these three are mine.
Fine.
Sorry that I wrote on them. In the academic,
Pass one down to them.
they each need one.
Yeah.
So the positions that are interim have an asterisk on them. But there are some more that should be on here, and there's been some changes since they were created. I can't only speak to,
More what?
there's three.
Oh, I see.
There's chart 1, 2, and 3, if you look on the right, up on the
I
right
think there
side.
are some. I'll locate them.
2. We're good. I need another 2. Are you taking them for Valerie?
Eduardo, what did you say you
I
needed?
need chart 1, please.
Chart
1.
1.
Thank you. Asterisks are interims?
Correct. So if we want to take them one by
There's
one.
a single asterisk is interim, a double asterisk is acting. The difference between an interim and an acting is simply that if it's an acting person, it means that the person who is in the position prior is still employed by the district and is doing something else for the district right now, or maybe they're on a sabbatical, or maybe they're on a medical leave or something like that. They're still an employee of the district. If it's an interim appointment, it means that the person who was in the position before is gone from the district for whatever reason. So that's the difference.
There is an error in my area. David Leclerc is not an interim. That is his title, Assistant Director.
Okay, this is the wrong one today.
I apologize, I got
These are wrong. Hang on a second.
David Leclerc is what?
He is, that's his job, Assistant Director.
Oh, so he's not.
He's not interim.
Gotcha.
I have a bunch of changes on mine if you look on chart 2. I had written in on everybody's, Paul in the School of Business Engineering and Technology is interim, so there should be an asterisk there. I wrote that in on everybody's part. We are currently filling the Dean of Instructional Support. We're going through the process right
What are
now.
you looking at?
So Matt
Page
Jordan
2.
should be removed and just empty,
Mhm.
vacant. And also I have a larger one that shows my area, but under School of Science and Math, Carrie Starbird is the Associate Dean and she's interim. In the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Paul Price is interim. It's not on this one, there's another chart that shows my area in greater detail.
Okay, so,
But you
what
can
was
just
Carrie?
write those in.
Science and math?
Science
She's
and
math,
Math
yeah.
has an Associate Dean, which is Carrie, who's interim. And then the next one down, School of Humanities and Social Sciences has Paul Price, who's interim.
And then School
Hold
of
on,
Visual.
Hold on.
Yeah, these charts only go to the top level.
Correct.
Yeah, these don't.
I'm just telling you since we're looking
Right,
at
so-
it.
Right, so it's incomplete.
Well, it's complete in terms of the senior management of, for
Yeah,
example,
it's
under
just the school
academic
deans.
affairs, you've got the school deans and you've got the major functions. So you've got the 5 schools, you've got the TLC, you've got the instructional support area, which is a dean. You've got the dean of library distance education, and you've got the dean, which is now going to be an associate dean, I guess, of learning assistance center.
Right, but from the accreditation point of view, they're not gonna sit, they're gonna say, okay, we only want the top, right? They're gonna be concerned about Carrie, they're gonna be concerned about Paul, they're gonna be concerned about all these, right?
Right. And
Right.
so you know, I think I guess what you're looking for is a complete list of all the interim appointments.
Right.
So I think, Kathy, we should just ask HR to provide a complete list of all the interim appointments. Okay? And as we said to the commission when we were there, we're
We've done a great job.
quickly filling those positions. So,
Well, and
we'll do
on
that.
this side, we are doing the Dean of Instructional Support right now. We're doing the Dean of Library and Distance Ed right now. And we're also doing the Associate Dean of Distance Ed. Those are all in progress right now. But then John Wood position needs to be vacant because he's retiring. So that one needs to be marked with an asterisk and marked vacant. We'll be putting in an interim. We're interviewing on Friday for the interim position.
For the
that.
interim. So right now it is vacant.
Well, he's still here.
Oh, he's still right,
Yeah.
right, gotcha.
What about?
So that's the changes for my area. But we will be filling 3 of them, so I feel that we're on the
That
right
would be good.
track.
And that would leave with only 3, that would be good.
Yeah, it leaves
Paul,
Paul,
Carrie,
Paul,
and
and Carrie.
Paul, and Carrie, right, that would be good.
And as I had told you yesterday, we were holding off on those because of
Right.
discussions about realignment, and we held off at your request.
And when is the report, the next report due?
We
What
won't,
The
report?
follow-up, no, our follow-up report.
Wait,
we
when they
won't
tell
know
us.
until they tell us, but most likely it's probably gonna be in early spring. That's
Okay.
usually when. they-
That's when we write our next report.
That's when we turn in our next
Well,
report.
okay, so so the reason I'm asking is, if we turn it in the spring, that gives us X amount of months to fill it in, which would give us a better report.
Correct.
Right, right, yeah.
We want the absolute best report we
Sure,
can do. That's
yeah.
our goal. Our goal is to be reaffirmed as quickly as possible.
Okay. And do we have and then to make things even look better for us, do we have a time period in which these individuals have been serving as interim? Because from my perspective, I would prefer that we fill those that have been there the oldest, and then so that I'd rather show to the accreditation team that we have 3 interim positions that have been there for 4 months versus 3 interim
I'm
positions that have
going
been
to
there for 15 months.
Dr. Corner to send an email request to Terry Hampton that at my request, I would like HR to provide a complete report of all positions that are currently filled by either interim or acting appointments, and the start date, and the names of those individuals, the start date of that appointment, and the end date, which I believe by board policy and/or ed code is 18 months. Actually, you can look at the
Board
board.
policy and Title V differ by
But
6
we also
months.
have an administrative hiring policy that talks about a 12-month hit and an 18-month, Ryan, it's in there.
Yeah.
So I need to get a report on that. Yeah.
I can offer that in my area, for example, I was asked to pause while HR focused on the 36 faculty hires. And now we're moving forward with flying the managerial roles that have been vacant in the order that they've been in the longest.
Ryan, please add to that a column of position flown or when will be flown to that request.
And Eduardo, I also forgot to mention Joe Fetner, we did fill that one. And actually, that's the associate dean under School of Visual Media and Performing
And
Arts.
when is the next Capm meeting going to be?
Well, that is item 14.
She is so darn cute. Every time I see her, I just cannot believe she's so darn cute.
And we did fill ours in the order in which they were, because that Joe Fetner position had been around for a long time. Leslie's is,
Okay, so excuse me, I'm sorry, I interrupted myself with the cuteness comment. When did you say the next Capm meeting was?
Item 14.
So, okay,
When?
so can we talk about the next Capm meeting date now?
Yes. to be
Because I would
determined.
like to have that report by that next Capm meeting.
So, is there anything else on the accreditation response plan? Hearing nothing,
Well, no.
moving on to number 14.
Okay, let's look at let's come up with the date now. I understand that, but let's look at,
Just have them get it to us in a week.
well, Julie, in fact, you send it to Julie, Julie will get it done.
I believe Julie's
She's got
on
the
vacation.
information.
I'll take care of it.
All right, but the point is, I want it by the next Capm meeting, whenever that's gonna be.
So, future meeting dates. Are we looking at July? Okay.
If Bob wants to participate, we only have one in June. If not, in July it is.
Well, on that, I will be at the table, but not obviously the superintendent president, I'll be there as the assistant superintendent.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I'll
So,
bring my gaffer's tape with me.
he was on.
My preference is we have one in June, because I have a lot of topics that I'd like to discuss.
June 17th is a board meeting, so that's not going to work. The only other June is the 24th.
24th? Okay.
I will be out of town on vacation that week, but that doesn't mean you can't have a meeting.
Do you still want to have a meeting without the interim superintendent present there?
No.
Can we do it sometime around the board meeting?
How about the 18th?
We have
No,
met.
no, hold up. How about the 2nd, 23rd? Are you gone that week, Bob?
Yeah, I'm gone that whole week.
How about the 29th or the 30th? Are you gone?
I'm back on the 29th.
Can we do it at 30th?
I can do it on the 30th. I have to leave
Would it,
by 5. Well, actually, probably by 4:30. I've got to be for an event in Anaheim that night.
I'd just rather you be here.
Okay. I mean, we can do it at 2:30 or 3 if you want.
2:30?
Does that work for everybody else, or what's the issue?
my only question is that's the day before Dr. Verdeen comes. Do we, I mean, what type of
Might have to
agenda
be
items are we
questions, so-
talking about?
Well, I'm going to be done. I need time to vacuum his office and polish
Polished
everything.
silver.
Yeah.
Polish the silver and stuff.
Let me tell you,
Yeah, because I think knowing what type of items we're discussing might determine,
okay.
Oh, you think he needs to be here?
we'll see.
Okay, well, let's see here.
Well,
So,
believe me, I will not make any decisions that I think he needs to make, but I'm happy to have the meeting or not. It's up to you guys.
okay, so let me tell you the topics that we want, and you
Okay.
can tell me whether or not. Okay, so one is in regards to, a while back, we discussed what's gonna happen to the Apple facilities, and then it was stated that Apple facilities will become PD facilities. But now, we're being told that that's gonna be turned into staging. So the question then is, where is PD gonna be housed? Is that correct?
Yeah, so I had a meeting yesterday with Merlin
Oh, okay.
regarding the
All right, so
building.
this is what we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
Eduardo had the opportunity at the last board meeting to see the Measure P presentation.
Thank you.
And he had the opportunity to see at least some of the folks, including a couple of faculty, speak to the ceramics and sculpture issues. And the long and the short of it is that the board directed that they are not going to move forward with any of the Measure P activities, which means we're holding up the dental work, the geosciences activity, and the math resource center, and a couple of other things, until we have a solution for the sculpture ceramics thing. So they directed us to have that solution to them by the meeting on the 17th. Obviously, we've been working with that faculty for quite a while to try to come to a resolution. It's my understanding that a resolution has been found, and it's going to be presented to the two faculty, and more faculty tomorrow at 4 o'clock. And we'll see if they agree to it or not. Apparently, one of the solutions is to make a number of changes in the V building that would remove the APL office. I hadn't heard that specifically, but I understand that could be part of it. And in doing so, I think make that all part of the new Teaching Learning Center, which will now stay in the B building and occupy the space that the current architecture program is in. So I've not yet been part of the discussion. I don't know if Dr. Bell, it was discussed specifically what would happen with the APL, the professional learning
It was
space.
discussed, the area that we're talking about is going to intrude upon APL. We did not talk specifically about that office in the American Culture.
Yeah, it's my impression that APL would be incorporated APL.
PD.
I don't even want to use that, so pardon me on that. The PD would be wrapped into that center somehow. But we'll find out more tomorrow. So as far as staging, I think you mean the wood shop or I think, yeah, because part of this has got to be changing the wood shop and doing some things, and actually the new student gallery would be moved aside, relocated to R118, I believe. And the new student gallery, I think, is going to be given to the sculpture ceramics people in order to do what they need to do.
Okay, so how much space does the current APO office have? Because that was gonna be PD. So I don't know, I'm just gonna say 1,000 square feet. So will PD have 1,000 square feet?
I don't know.
Okay,
So-
so that's, so
In the
so
art
that's,
building or somewhere else?
I think that'd be a future agenda item,
Okay,
but
so we'll
I
put
hear
that-
what you're asking for is a
okay.
future agenda
all
item.
right, so okay,
So
that one.
what else was it?
And again, as Chris said, in that building or someplace else. I
Right.
think that's operative language.
We just wanna maintain the space. So the second thing is, you mentioned is architecture. So there is an issue that occurred a while back, right, in which architecture was going to lose its space. And then we had Senate resolutions, we had to go to the board of trustees, and everything stopped. Architecture was given its space. And now we're hearing that architecture now is gonna lose some of its space. So after the
Architecture-
whole thing, we're going back to square one.
Well, yes and no. God, it's amazing how complicated we make things to ourselves. But I respect what you're saying. The architecture at the moment is going to move up to the second floor of the B building where the second-year pathways program is. That's where architecture is going right now, and
Will it
it's,
maintain will it maintain
my
the square
understanding,
footage?
it's my understanding that the dean has spoken with the architecture faculty member who is here now, and that individual thinks that will work out fine for their needs. That's what I've been told.
So you realize that that whole thing is tied together with having lost Coleman Griffith in that program. And that Coleman would never have tolerated that because he made it very clear that they could not keep the agreements they have with SciArc and USC and Woodbury if their space is reduced.
Well, so I'm going to stop us here because while I think it's a very valid conversation, it's not one that's on the agenda, but
Okay,
I'm
so
hearing
this-
that it wants to be on the agenda.
Okay, so that'll be, okay, so that's one. Then the next item is the current issue with the basketball coach.
Well, before you do that, because this is important to state, we're going to make some decisions tomorrow, which are going to go to the board next Wednesday night. And we're gonna have to say to the board that everybody's in agreement, or say that they're not. And then we're gonna say to the board, because of the corollary impacts of fixing ceramics and sculpture issues, it now provides issues for other programs. Now, I'm not gonna say that. Somebody else, like the dean or the architecture faculty, or somebody's gonna have to say that if in fact that's the position that they're gonna take. Then I'm gonna recommend as superintendent president that we can not hold the other programs up. You know, the dental, blah, blah, blah. We can't hold those up while we continue this discussion. So I want you to know that in order to move things forward, I need to do what the board president's asked me to do, which I will. But if there's concern about architecture, it's not going to wait for another Capm meeting. The topic's going to come up
Okay,
next Wednesday.
okay.
Okay.
Right.
So your next
the
item?
agenda, the issue of the basketball coach.
Yes.
Uh,
Okay.
Okay, again, as our responsibility, we're here to defend the faculty. Now, whatever the punishment was, that's beyond our scope. We resent the fact that this information, whatever happened, came out in the San Gabriel Valley News. So by what right does the college believe that they could have made this public? Because from the historical perspective, background, if this had been administrator, this would not have been in the news. But when it occurs to a faculty, for some reason, there is a leak and it becomes public. So we don't like the fact that this happened, and so we want to put it on the agenda to an explanation of why it was necessary.
Next item?
Yeah, next item, that's it.
Okay, so just those three items: location and PT, architecture, and basketball coach.
And then then we'll have
The interims. So, hearing that, my question for the group is, are these items of a timeline nature that they need to take place in June, or are they of a timeline nature that we wait till July? What is the perspective of the group?
The first two, without a doubt. Now, whether the college wants to put out to give us a statement as to why they decided to do what they did with Verone, that's fine. But we just want to know why that happened. Why it was okay to have this information become so public.
So let me ask you a question.
But the first two items definitely.
Dr. Bell, didn't that also get released on campus? That information is on the website? Yeah.
Which came out forever. Right.
Well, they came
Yeah.
out simultaneously.
Right.
So the information regarding that situation, it wasn't about the coach, it was about the program.
But the coach's name came out and all that. So, I mean, had this occurred to an administrator, I seriously doubt that this would have been in the, how does the San Gabriel, I mean,
Yeah.
we resent that.
Well, there were other reasons, community reasons.
Okay, well, I mean, we can put that on,
Yeah.
I'll let you decide if you want to put it on as soon as possible or in July.
To
I'm
the extent that
asking-
we can, I'd be happy to share the reasons with you.
Okay.
But there were reasons why we did that. And we tried to break the news internally and externally at the same time.
And one of the things I would say is that Capm is a great process that we use, but it's not the only venue by which you guys can talk to the Senate, to the president of the college. If there's this immediate concern that you have with the basketball coach, and I know you said that it's going to be an agenda item on your Senate meeting on Monday, I mean, I would suggest talking to Dr. Bell or Dr. Miller now for your meeting on Monday, so you know what's going on, because by the time we have a meeting, even if it's June 30th, at least in terms of the academic senate's discussion, that ship will have sailed, correct?
Well, we're not answering the specific, that's not our purview. It's just the fact that this information became public when it should not have. I mean, it's embarrassing to the faculty.
Okay. Likewise with PD and architecture, timeline-wise, what I'm hearing from Dr. Miller is that the board has asked for something by Wednesday. Is that correct, Dr. Miller?
Yes.
And that, it may or may not be an issue by the time the next Capm rolls around, but
Well, that's why I said what I said, which is if there's going to be concerns voiced, I would voice them Wednesday night before the vote.
You know, the
Before the
problem,
board
Bob,
votes.
is there's nobody to voice a concern now because you've eliminated Coleman Griffith from that program.
But no, there's,
And so
How many
you're
architecture
gonna
faculty
risk
do we have?
losing the transfer status of that program.
well, we have one full-time faculty architect.
There's one tenure track,
Right.
full-time tenure track.
Well, he
faculty.
obviously will not defend
What
the
happened to
need
the
for
agreement
space
that
in
exists in
in that
Mount
area.
Pointy?
Well,
There was
he-
an agreement, right, Dr. Bill, that the architecture program would not be touched.
Okay.
Lo and behold, a year later, now it's being touched.
Well, I don't know about the agreement, but I would say that the one architecture faculty member, I believe, has been consulted in this matter.
The faculty who are impacted throughout this entire discussion that will be shared with the Serenos faculty, all those faculty have been consulted in this. So none of this is done blind. So the current architectural faculty, I don't know why I'm blanking on his last name, Michael, he has been consulted on it. So he has been engaged in discussion, he's been engaged in discussion through his dean.
And there are certain things that he requested.
How much space would they lose?
He
Are they gonna
he
lose?
requested certain equipment that could be in a different space, and so that was part of the discussion, and that was what he requested.
How much space? They're gonna
Can
go from to?
Can I ask that maybe we set a meeting date, we adjourn the meeting, and then if people in an informal manner want to discuss the space issues relative to architecture, we just stick around and we do it?
I think that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
So when are we going to have our next meeting? Am I hearing the 30th, or what is the prerogative of the group?
I'm good, well, can we meet, if Monday or Tuesday, 15th or 16th? In order to have that discussion before it goes to the board.
I can guarantee you we probably won't have the interims all compiled by then, but if there's other urgent issues, I will default to the group. Dr. Miller, Dr. Bell, 15th or 16th? 15th, you're out, aren't you, Bell?
Yeah, because we have exec on the Wednesday.
No, I'm not out. We have a faculty association, manager association benefits meeting in the morning.
Oh, okay.
So I am available. Oh, sorry. I know, it upsets me too. Oh my goodness. I could do it between the hours of 12:30 and 2
Which day would you like?
Monday the
on
15th.
Monday the 15th,
1 to 2,
12:30 to 2.
12:30 to 2?
So, hearing that,
We're not available.
Oh, and Dr.
We're not available.
Vernina, I think, is going to be on campus part of that day.
We're not available that day,
Okay, then that's not
during
going to
that
work.
time.
Later, though.
Yeah. Academic sense, then.
Yeah, with academic center.
Oh, you got a meeting, if that's not
Yeah.
going to work for you guys anyway, that's right.
Well, 12:30 to 2 works for us.
We could do dinner. We could have a dinner meeting after your Senate meeting.
Dinner meeting?
I'm sure you're fine.
I've never heard of such a thing.
Have to do it
No,
all.
I have a dinner meeting that night.
Squeeze
I
it
never
in.
have a dinner meeting. I
Oh,
actually
you
have a
do.
dinner meeting.
Can you guys come?
To a dinner meeting on Monday after Senate?
That's fine.
Dinner?
I'm not going to be.
That wasn't my idea.
Well, none of the four of you are available from 12:30 to 2?
No, we have a meeting at noon.
Okay.
Well, we can still have our meeting. And you guys, you know what the
This
topics
is
will
not,
be.
yeah,
Yeah, this is,
Okay,
I
so,
mean, yeah, I think this is sort of
I
off
would,
the
I would
table.
suggest that we not meet unless we have everybody in the table at the same time, because, you know, within 2 weeks, the transition is taking place, and I think it'd be important for everybody to get a
so
conversation.
why don't I just suggest this? Let's not have a Capm meeting, but have an information meeting where the facilities plans that are gonna be presented to the board are relayed to the Senate president, so he can make an informed decision about how he's gonna respond at the board meeting.
Well, I still say we should have the 15th. I mean, no disrespect to the incoming, but right now, we are the executive committee. So we should have that, we should consider that. And I don't think we're gonna come to any agreement, but I want to hear, it's not on the agenda, so I wanna hear the justification for the college to sacrifice one program from another, because this is going back to cosmetology. We try to help out nursing at the expense of cosmetology. So now we're doing the same thing to architecture, and I know you're saying you may not remember there's an agreement, but there was an agreement not to touch architecture. And so we're going back to the same thing.
And I would agree, I think it's a bigger problem. I think pitting faculty against faculty in terms of facilities and space, I mean, even though that's not the intention, it happens and it's wrong. But I think it's a bigger conversation
Can we
about
go
the
off? Can we
transparency
go
of
off
how decisions are
offline on this now? Can we
So-
adjourn this meeting, and then I want to talk to you guys about this?
Marina will send out a request for discussing what date we should set for the meeting. The options right now will stand the 15th, the 16th, or the 29th and 30th, and we will send out an email to that effect tomorrow. Good with the committee?
Okay, yeah.
Adjourned.